All the countries on the planet are sunk in debt. The United States today owes more than $38 trillion, the highest value in all its history. The European Union carries something around 14 trillion. Japan, nearly 9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations such as Saudi Arabia or industrial powers such as Germany and China are stuck in unpayable figures. And here arises the great paradox. If the whole world owes, to whom exactly is it owed? That is the question that reveals the hidden mechanism of power. Because debt is not only an economic problem, it is the invisible structure upon which the modern world was built. History shows that every war, every crisis, and every period of growth always had a common thread: indebtedness. It is what moves the machine. The global economy is like a spider web sustained by promises of payment that may never be fulfilled. And if you follow that trail of creditors long enough, you will reach an uncomfortable truth. The world does not owe money to one specific person, but to itself. However, that does not mean that everyone benefits in the same way. In a hall of mirrors, some reflect power, others only debt. To understand how we arrived at this point, we must look back, centuries before the invention of the credit card or digital transactions. The idea of national debt was not born on Wall Street, but on the battlefield. In the year 1694, England was at war with France and was running out of gold. Desperate, the king turned to merchants in search of resources. In exchange, he promised to pay interest guarantee by future taxes. Thus was born the Bank of England, and with it, a new kind of power. The creation of the bank changed everything. For the first time, a state could spend money that did not yet exist, and in exchange, creditors received something unprecedented: an official government promise that could be bought, sold, or traded as if it were gold. Thus was born the public bond, the embryo of the modern financial system. Soon, France copied the model, then Holland perfected it, and the newly independent United States adopted it to finance its revolution and later its expansion. From then on, debt ceased to be a sign of weakness and became the true thermometer of a nation's confidence. Ancient empires conquered lands in search of precious metals. Modern ones issue bonds in search of interest. The battlefield transformed into a balance sheet. 3 centuries later, debt became the main export of Earth. Today, the United States owes more than 38 trillion, Japan more than 9. And every 100 days, the world creates the equivalent of more than $1 trillion in new loans. Every country owes, every bank lends, and every citizen, consciously or not, is part of this cycle, as a taxpayer, saver, or investor. But the question remains, who is really on the other end of this rope? Let's begin with the United States, because its debt is not only a national matter, it is global. Of the more than $38 trillion the country owes, about half belongs to investors and financial institutions, not to other parts of the government itself. Approximately 2/3 of those investors are American. Banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining third, about 9 trillion, is in the hands of foreign countries. Japan is the largest creditor, with around $1 trillion. Next comes China, with about 800 billion. Then appear the United Kingdom, Luxembourg, and Belgium. That is to say, when someone says that the United States owes China, that is only partially true. In practice, most of the American debt is within America itself. The Treasury issues bonds, banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve buys back part of them, creating new dollars in the process. And in the end, the taxes paid by citizens sustain the payment of interest on those same bonds that return to the institutions that bought them. It is like looking into a mirror within another mirror, an infinite reflection. The debt is real, but the creditor is the same system that creates it. And this cycle is not exclusive to the United States. It repeats on a global scale. Japan buys American bonds. The United States lends to Europe through the International Monetary Fund. Europe finances developing countries through the World Bank. And those countries, in turn, deposit their reserves in the same Western banks and bonds. It is a gigantic circuit of promises that circulates across the planet as if it were electricity. Each nation sustains another's paper. Each promise is guaranteed by another promise. It is a game in which no one can stop playing, because if one player stands up from the table, the collapse begins. But there exists an even deeper layer, the financial markets. Behind every government bond, there is a network of invisible institutions, investment funds, pension funds, central banks, and sovereign wealth funds that manage tens of trillions of dollars. They are the true arbiters of global confidence. They decide which countries can obtain cheap money and which must pay dearly to survive. When they lose faith in an economy, the effect is devastating. Currencies collapse, governments fall, and entire nations crumble overnight. Democracy may decide who governs, but the markets decide who survives. And at the top of this hierarchy sits the true god of modern money, the central bank. It not only manages debt, it creates it. Every time the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, new money is created in exchange. The liability of one balance sheet becomes the asset of another. It is a dance of numbers and trust. Every dollar in circulation is, in fact, someone's unit of debt. Money, at its core, is only a promise, and every promise depends on faith that it will be fulfilled. For decades, this mechanism worked because there was a single glue holding it together: trust. As long as investors believed that governments would continue paying interest, even if they never repaid the principal, the system could spin indefinitely. But history has already shown what happens when that trust breaks. That's what happened in Greece in 2010. The government's debt became unpayable, bondholders panicked, and interest rates skyrocketed. The European Central Bank and the IMF intervened, but the price of the rescue was high. Austerity, cuts, unemployment, and an entire generation sacrificed in the name of stability. The same script repeated elsewhere. In Argentina, successive defaults transformed debt into an almost hereditary burden. In Sri Lanka, fuel shortages and political collapse emerged when the government ran out of foreign currency to pay its creditors. And suddenly, the faces behind the numbers acquired names: IMF, rating agencies, banks, and anonymous funds that in practice controlled the fate of entire nations. But even after chaos, the cycle always begins again. Old debts are restructured, new loans arise, and the wheel turns once more as if nothing had happened. Because in the modern world, debt was not made to be paid. It was made to be perpetuated. That is the secret almost no one says aloud. Governments do not plan to settle their debts. Not now, not ever. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's simply how the system was designed. Unlike an ordinary person who must pay what they owe, governments simply refinance what already exists. They issue new bonds to pay off the old ones, in a process economists call rollover. Interest is the true product, the rent charged for stability. Contemporary capitalism depends on that rent just as a body depends on breathing. The United States, for example, will never pay off its $38 trillion. It will continue renewing the debt forever. Japan has done the same for decades. Its debt already exceeds 250% of its GDP, and yet the yields on its bonds remain near zero. No one expects payment. What is expected is the renewal of the agreement, the continuity of the illusion that everything is under control. Because for large investors, public debt is not a threat, but the safest asset on the planet. A US Treasury bond, far from being seen as a problem, is considered a gem. Pension funds keep it, banks use it as collateral, and central banks treat it as if it were money. The entire system depends on governments never paying their debts. Because if for some reason they decided to liquidate them all, the result would be catastrophic. Banks would lose their most stable assets. The amount of dollars would plummet abruptly, and the world would enter a deflationary collapse. Paying the debt would destroy precisely the mechanism that makes the economy work. That is why governments do the opposite of what they preach. Instead of paying, they continue issuing more bonds rhythmically, as if keeping the pulse of the economy beating. Debt, in that sense, is the heart of modern capitalism. Each heartbeat represents a new loan, a new flow of interest, a new movement of trust. It runs through the veins of pension funds, mortgages, wages, and investments across the planet. And that is why, when a politician promises to balance the books or pay the national debt, the speech sounds nice, but it is pure fiction. The true goal was never to eliminate debt, but to keep it alive and controlled, like a flame that warms but does not burn. The secret is simple. As long as trust exists, the numbers can grow indefinitely. What truly sustains the system is not payment, but belief. When that belief is maintained, markets flow, currencies appreciate, and the machine keeps running. But when it breaks, nothing else matters. The numbers lose meaning. Interest rates soar, and the castle of promises begins to crumble. Money, in the end, is just a story that we all agree to believe. And like every story, it lasts only as long as the audience keeps believing in the plot. But there is something even subtler behind the curtain. Trust is not distributed equally. When it is said that we owe it to ourselves, that phrase is only half true, because the interest payments do not return to everyone. They rise, flowing from taxpayers and workers toward the great institutions and investors who own the debt. Global debt is, therefore, an inverted social ladder. Those at the bottom pay, those at the top collect promises. That is why inequality and indebtedness grow together. One feeds the other. The system rewards those who hold debt and punishes those who merely pay it. Central banks and investment funds live from eternal refinancing. The common citizen lives trying to balance bills and dreams. On a planetary scale, it is the same game, only with bigger numbers and quieter consequences. Debt is the engine that drives progress, but also the brake that limits those who lack the power to issue it. In the end, creditors and debtors are just two sides of the same mechanism. Neither is hero nor villain. The problem begins when the engine runs out of fuel, when there are no new loans left to sustain the old promises. It is then that the question ceases to be theoretical and becomes personal. Who really owes whom? Because at the top of this pyramid, there is not a single culprit. It is not China. It is not the IMF. It is not Wall Street. It is the system itself, and we who are part of it. The modern financial system transformed debt itself into money. Governments create it, banks multiply it, investors trade it, and we, the ordinary citizens, depend on it to live. The boundary between what is credit and what is debt has dissolved. What once meant servitude is now seen as balance. But that balance is fragile. Because if one day trust breaks, if the invisible thread that sustains the value of money snaps, the entire system will reveal its true nature. A castle made of promises that could never be fulfilled forever. And that is the most uncomfortable point of all. Debt is the foundation of modern civilization, but also its invisible prison. It is the mechanism that allows governments to spend what they do not have, banks to profit from what they do not own, and people to live in a stability that in reality does not exist. The machine keeps running because no one dares to turn it off, because everyone, in some way, depends on it to survive. We are debtors and creditors of the same dream, a dream backed by faith. The truth is that the system does not need everyone to understand how it works. It only needs everyone to believe that it works, that the numbers on screens, the indexes, the markets, and the interest rates represent something solid, but they do not. They represent trust, and trust, unlike gold, cannot be stored, only maintained. That is why, when people speak of collapse, it is not about the end of money, but the end of the belief that makes it possible. Deep down, every bill you hold, every balance you see on your screen, is a globally shared "I owe you," a promise written in the air. And as long as the majority keeps believing, the illusion will keep working. But if one day that collective faith wavers, the world will remember what debt has always been, a promise made in the hope that it never needs to be collected. It is a silent pact between governments, markets, and ordinary people. We pretend to pay, they pretend to receive, and the cycle continues. And if this made you see money differently, remember, history always reveals what the present tries to hide. Nothing we live through is new, only renamed. That is why you must keep questioning, observing, and seeking to understand what lies behind appearances. Because while many get distracted by numbers, few truly grasp what they mean. And if you want to take the next step in this reflection, watch the video that now appears on your screen. Congratulations for making it to the end. Few do. That shows you are not looking for easy answers, but to understand what truly moves the world economy. If this message made you think, don't keep it just for yourself. Share it, like it, and subscribe so that more people awaken to this invisible truth that sustains and imprisons the modern world. Because understanding the system is the first step toward freeing yourself from it.